It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, last night, Joe Biden gave a State of the Union address at a critical time in American history, and he did so with the lowest approval ratings of his presidency, record inflation, serious political division, and now an international crisis with Russia, which looks like it might be protracted and very disruptive to the global economy for months, if not years, even if we escape a world war. How do you think the president did with his State of the Union address and confronting these overwhelming challenges? And do you think there's a chance he can regain the country's confidence during this troubling time?
Very important questions. Let me start by saying I've always thought that the State of the Union address is a very important speech for a president. And typically, it undergoes a great deal more work as a speech that, at least in its entirety, is only going to be given once. And it's a speech in which the president really gets to lay out and say what he has on his mind and collectively on the administration's mind. In other words, you're not going to a rally, you're not going to an event, you're not standing in front of a certain kind of audience, you're really standing in front of the American people. And so months of work go into this to prepare the speech. Of course, the situation in Ukraine changed, I'm sure, what was a lot of the preparation. And I kind of saw three speeches. And I would say that the first speech, which was 25% of the hour-long address on Ukraine, was really, I thought, a very effective set of remarks about why America was doing what it was doing, the impact we'd had on Russia as a result of sanctions, and really as a result of holding together NATO. And I thought that the president laid out a very strong case for the approach he had taken, and rightfully, gained bipartisan support, at least by judging by applause, bipartisan support for those efforts and the importance of that mission. So I give that third of the speech probably the highest marks. The next part of the speech, which was most of the rest part of the speech, was kind of a recitation of legislative priorities. That's not unusual for a State of the Union, but in my mind, it was a missed opportunity because I believe that President Biden could have rolled from the foreign policy element to describe how he wanted to think through the next year or so, certainly the next year. And whether you call it a pivot, whether you call it a reset, I don't know that you need any of those terms, but he could have really been much more clear about the important things he wanted to accomplish and limit the number. And Alice talked about this effectively before. Instead, it seemed to me they chose to use most of the rest of the speech to go through this list. And I heard one commentator say the altitude was kind of lowered. You just didn't feel it was as significant a set of remarks when he was into the legislative piece of all of this. The messages are pretty familiar. Thought it was delivered well, but I suspect he lost a lot of viewers and didn't help himself that much, and in a way hurt the very final part or third of the speech, last portion of the speech, in which he did call for unity. And I thought he had a pretty strong conclusion, but I suspect, again, he lost a lot of viewers. So I guess I give him mixed grades. I don't think that with all of these issues in front of him, that one speech is going to turn anything around. I think he chose it to essentially say how committed he is to pursuing the foreign policies as it relates to Russian expansion and Ukraine, and he's going to pursue a long list of legislative initiatives, some of which I'm sure will get done. I don't know that it'll be determinative when we get to November of this year as to whether how people vote, but I don't think it's going to hurt either.
Al, how do you evaluate the State of the Union and President Biden's presentation?
I sort of agree with where Craig comes out. I thought he did fine, and particularly on Ukraine. But the reality is that what happens over the next 6 months is going to be a lot more important than what he said Tuesday night. For those who are devotees of the spy, you know that I've been calling for the president to sort of have a reset of his domestic agenda. And here's why. The Build Back Better plan, his big domestic initiative, was drafted before crime and inflation emerged as the two top issues. So it really doesn't address those. And it seems to me, until he's credible on those issues, he's probably not going to be heard on most everything else he says, including all the good things he did, like create more jobs than any other president in his first year. But you got to cross that threshold of credibility on the issues that voters most care about. And CNN did one of those flash instant polls. And because it was of only of people who watched it, there were many more Democrats, 11% more Democrats than normal in that poll. But even then, a majority of the respondents said he talked too little on crime and inflation. Now, on crime, I thought his reset was pretty good, pretty clear. He said he rejected defunding the police, which incidentally has been against all of his life, from as far as I know. And he called for funding of more police, more funding of the police. Now he needs to repeat that day after day after day, because he's fighting a perception caused by the left of our party that we're soft on crime and we want to, and we're anti-police. So he has to deal with that. And I thought he did a good job, a clear job on that. On inflation, it was not quite as good, the break. He didn't mention Build Back Better, but I think he missed an opportunity, and that opportunity was to have said, look, I'm going to pull back this Build Back Better plan because we can't add the inflationary pressures right now. Now, there are a couple of initiatives that I think are really important: pre-K, tax credit, whatever he thinks are most important. And we ought to push those. But for the plan as a whole, I'm going to pull it back because we're fighting inflation. That's the most important issue. And I think if he had done that, the break would have been clear, and it would have been a message that would have finally begun to penetrate that he really cared about inflation. But let me just say, to conclude, what happens in Ukraine is really most important. I think he's done a remarkable job of pulling together the NATO allies and getting everybody to agree to sanctions and to aid Ukraine. But whether he gets credit for that may very well depend on the outcome of this war. And it's not helped by the daily deluge on television and in social media of what's actually happening, because we can see it now in today's wars, of all the Russian attacks on civilians. And I think in the end, how Ukraine turns out may be the most important thing.
You know, Craig, when I think about what President Biden said, and I also kind of calculate what will happen to our economy if, in fact, we start using oil as part of our sanctions strategy, our whole world will change, won't it?
Well, indeed it will. And the political world is going to end up being shaped by pocketbook issues. It always is. I do think that, again, the first third of the speech last night laid the groundwork for why it's important to be doing what we're doing. But Americans are not really great at sacrifice. And if we go into the fall and early winter with, high fuel costs and continued inflation, it's a problem. But, this is one of these things where a president goes into office with a whole set of expectations and ambitions and suddenly deals with the realities of the world. And I have to say that Biden gets credit for effectively dealing with really an unimaginable reality in some ways. And that's Putin's clear, complete loss of a sense of reality. Biden has successfully, with the NATO allies, turned the world against Russia and against Putin. Is that enough to do well in the elections in November? I don't know, but I think he will deserve credit for it, and so a lot depends on where we stand. I also think a lot depends on whether he can actually bring about a form of unity. I know the Republicans are going to continue to resist, and some may be supportive. Certainly there'll be, I think, Republicans supportive of the foreign policy initiatives. I have to say, I'm not goading my friend Al, I was a little surprised, and I'd never heard of this, but there were three Democratic responses to the Democratic president. One from the progressives, one from Black Democrats, I guess and one from the more moderate Democrats. On the night in which your president is speaking of unity, to have three different groups feel compelled, whether they're supportive or not, but feel compelled to go out and issue their own response seemed a bit much to me. So I think that one of the political tasks that is a must is to try to hold the party together. And because if that fractures, then even a little stronger, more favorable view of the president, which I suspect he will have by November, that won't be enough.
Al, you have the last word this time.
What I would say to the last point Craig made, my view, I've always thought unity in political parties is overrated. Because the price of unity in both parties is to move to the extremes. And the president would be, as he started his pivot, it will be much better off if he has a good centrist agenda and his own approval ratings go up. If his approval ratings go up, it doesn't matter how much the fringes of his party yell at him. It'll help Democrats running for Congress more than anything else. If the unified party is to, sort of soft pedal issues like crime and inflation, which is what the left would want, we have no chance. So I disagree on that point. I've always thought that what the president ought to do is do what's in the best interest of the country, no matter what fringes of his party want, and to try to raise his own approval ratings, because in the end, that's the biggest indicator of how parties are going to do in midterm elections. I think he's done a remarkable job with pulling together NATO. It will have an impact, I suppose, and probably not a good one on Democrats. If oil prices really continue to skyrocket, they're already very high because of Ukraine. But on the other hand, that's not going to be without context this time, because it's not like, we're fighting in some war in some country nobody's ever heard of, and with an enemy nobody understands, and we don't see it on television. Now you see it on your phone, you see it on your TV, you see it on your iPad, you see it on your laptop, and it's 24 hours a day, and you see the atrocities that the Russians are committing. And they're committing them, my father was born in Ukraine. And there are a lot of Americans who have real ties and don't like what the Russians are doing. And so the context may be a little different this time. And people may come to understand that if we're going to avoid a genocide of the Ukrainians, maybe we do have to, accept 30 or 40 or 50 cents more a gallon of gas.
We'll have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much. We'll see you next week.